This is a quote from Xi Jinping's speech more recently at the Bao Forum, which Ambassador mentioned, in April 2018, which I will read briefly. In a world aspiring for peace and development, the Cold War and zero-sum mentality looks even more out of place. Putting oneself on a pedestal or trying to immunize oneself from adverse development and cooperation will get nowhere. Only peaceful development and cooperation can truly bring win-win or all-win results. We live at a time with an overwhelming trend towards openness and connectivity. Human history shows that openness leads to progress, while seclusion leaves one behind. The world has become a global village where our interests are intertwined and our economic and social progress interconnected. To promote common prosperity and development in today's world, we have no choice but to pursue greater connectivity and integrated development. This speech resonates with the same conceptual framework of the previous slide, which I showed here, in terms of what the concept of connecting the world for peaceful development and cooperation. Now, when we think about what is preventing these ideas from being fully embraced by much of the Western world, I will point here to what is and has been, unfortunately, a dominant strategic idea of the old paradigm, what I would call the modern form of the British Empire. You see a picture of how the old British colonial empire conceived of how to maintain their world power constellation at the beginning of the last century. And you see the pivoted area called the Heartland, which in his own remarks, the founder of geopolitics, Sir Halford Mackinder, is quoted, "Who rules Central and Eastern Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world." Unquote. Now, some people might suggest that that was the old British Empire. Something the Chinese people certainly remember from the Opium Wars. But they believe it disappeared as a world power after 2 great world wars. That would be a wrong assumption. It did not disappear. It simply changed its form. The thinking never changed fundamentally. This modern form of the British Empire is built upon the so-called special relationship between Britain and the United States, which was formed at the end of the Second World War between U.S. President Harry Truman and Sir Winston Churchill in 1946, with the so-called famous Iron Curtain speech at Fulton, Missouri. The Cold War began and the world was again divided between East and West. And this so-called special relationship has been described as sometimes with British brains and American brawn, we will continue to rule the world. This special relationship was made possible by the early death of President Franklin Roosevelt in 1945, who had a very different idea of Americans' vision of what and how the world should look after the war. But when Roosevelt died in 1945, the world was divided between East and West, and it is this old paradigm of power constellation, of division and mistrust, which is today most strongly opposed to the Belt and the Road Initiative. As we move up in time, this is a rather recent 1997 well-known book by former American National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. It was entitled The Grand Chessboard: America's Primacy and Its Geopolitical Imperatives, 1997. The quote in that book, which I will read: "Europe and Asia are politically and economically powerful. It follows that American foreign policy must employ its influence in Eurasia in a manner that creates a stable continental equilibrium with the United States as the political arbiter. Eurasia is thus the chessboard on which the struggle for global primacy continues to be played, and that struggle involves geostrategy, the strategic management of geopolitical interests." Unquote. Now, in Sweden, up until now, they have officially refused to embrace the Belt and Road Initiative. They have, at the beginning, they ignored it, and the press refused to principally not publish anything about it. But as the Belt and Road Initiative has continued to grow in influence, with over 100 nations participating, they have lately attacked it in some circles or many circles, as China's new imperial plan to take over the world, or China's new authoritarianism, and similar expressions of mistrust and divisiveness. Such criticisms and even contempt for the Belt and Road Initiative made it almost impossible for any concrete understanding of the Belt and Road's true purpose. The Schiller Institute's Swedish chairman wrote an article praising the Belt and Road, which the major Swedish press very recently basically arrogantly wouldn't even publish. Now, that article is available for people because it did come in finally in a online reality article, and it is being made available there in the back. At the moment, however, it seems that the Swedish government generally, and the press and many academics, are following and listening way too much altogether to the old paradigm. Sweden clearly has trade and business interests with China, but they have not, at least up until now, and will not respond positively until now, to the true strategic intention of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, since Sweden has prided itself as being a neutral European country, and I, as a Swedish citizen myself, would suggest a good course of action might be to follow in the footsteps of another neutral European country, Austria. The Austrian business community, this is very recent, has shaped a change in governmental policy in October 2017 elections, pointing to the clear economic benefits of trade with China, but also with Russia as well. The official government program of the new coalition partners stated, "Austria lives in the middle of Europe, and thus through its geopolitical location alone represents an important hub. The position can have additional enormous benefit from a stronger development of the trans-European networks. The planned Silk Road project or the broad gauge rail project as well do not bypass Austria, but that we are a part of its hub." This is a picture, as you can see, of Austrian president together with invoking the European freight train to Vienna. The Swedish business community could do likewise and promote the same kind of cooperation and partnership with the Belt and the Road. The Belt and the Road does not mean subjugation, it does not mean submission, but rather working together for the benefit of all. This is a picture of the president of Austria at the Bau Forum with China's president. I would be very happy to see a picture of the Swedish Prime Minister shaking hands with the Chinese president and doing exactly the same as the Austrian president has just done. So what I want to do by conclusion is to raise certain philosophical points upon which the future collaboration with China and the Belt and the Road is based. This is a picture of Confucius, Chinese philosopher, on one side, Benjamin Franklin, the founder of the United States, on the other. The great inventor and diplomat Benjamin Franklin was pondering an American civilization that would be based on his readings of Chinese civilization. He extorted the virtues of Confucianism in 1737 to the readers of the Pennsylvania Gazette newspaper in a series of essays from the Morals of Confucius, quote. Mr. Franklin carried a passion for learning about all matters Chinese, as he wrote in 1784. China was a stronghold of creativity, knowledge, and wealth. Moreover, it was the most ancient and from a long experience the wisest of nations. Confucian philosophy was the gate through which it is necessary to pass to arrive at the sublimest of wisdom and the most perfect. Now, if Benjamin Franklin, the father of the world's first true democratic republic, had good reasons to understand the wisdom of China, I think this by itself would constitute a good idea to reopen the Confucian Institute in Uppsala, which has been closed. The last quote from China's president, which is taken from the speech that was made in, as I pointed earlier, at the UN. We should build a world of common prosperity excuse me, it's a little bit hard to read the quote there. We should build a world of common prosperity through win-win cooperation. Development is the top priority for all countries. Instead of beggaring their neighbors, countries should stick together like passengers in the same boat. We should seize the historic opportunity presented by new scientific and technological revolution and industrial transformation and further unleash productivity and creativity. So I'm going to conclude by pointing to the future, just what is meant by unleashing productivity and creativity. This is a picture of Kraft Erika, the space scientist from NASA, engineer and the developer of the Saturn space rocket. As it says, a balanced attitude towards technology and industry, environment, and ecology is essential to our mental and spiritual development, hence to the preservation of our future. Otherwise, jungle and wilderness inside the mind and outside will regain their stranglehold on humanity, as starvation and disease depopulate the earth and the will to grow dies. Even with stagnant technology and industry, misery and poverty will engulf mankind. And last here, the picture of an artist's conception of the communication satellite, which represents here on the left the idea that is now on the program for China to implement the Chang'e lander and rover on the far side of the moon. This is the first time in mankind's history that we will land on the far side of the moon. That has never been done. It was not done by the Americans in the earlier period. And the last quote from Kraft Erika, I think, characterizes a picture of the future. Earth and world are no longer synonyms. We no longer live in a closed world. One planet inside the womb of the biosphere. Our world is open to space, and its resources, therefore, are potentially limitless. The primary source of human growth is the mind, not the terrestrial environment. The power of the mind is far from exhausted, and the world and its resources are without limits to minds willing to grow. Now, it has been reported by China Aerospace Technology Corporation that the space plane transportation roadmap will be flight tested in 2020, and one milestone of long-term space transportation released at the end of last year, covering a period up to 2040. A mass movement for development with the Belt and Road in mind will ultimately point mankind towards its true destiny in the stars. Thank you.